Hey guys, I'm here with the last of my Magic Origins limited review videos. And in this one we're going to focus primarily on the archetypes that are in Magic Origins. It's a set, it's not quite like Modern Masters 2015, for example, which was just filled with archetypes, or the Holiday Cube drafts, which are filled with archetypes. But there is an archetype for every two-color combination, and Mark Rosewater actually recently wrote an article talking about how there's a gold card in each color combination that sort of exemplifies what that archetype is. So in this video, I'm going to go through each of the archetypes, and I'll start with the gold card in each color, and then I'll talk about the various synergies there are within that archetype. Like I said, though, the archetypes aren't quite as prevalent as they are in other sets. You don't necessarily have to go into these archetypes to have success, but I do think some of the archetypes are more powerful, and if you can pull these archetypes off, it's probably going to be your most powerful deck in that color combination. And I'll talk about that as we talk about each individual archetype. Also, this video is going to be a lot longer than the other limited review videos, and because of that, if you're only interested in specific archetypes, the description of this video is going to have timestamps for where the discussion of each archetype begins. Just another little caveat is, for the most part, this video doesn't discuss removal spells, except in archetypes where the removal is a big part of the archetype, such as enchantments that are removal spells. There's a few enchantment-related archetypes, and we'll talk about that in a second. Those are just cards you want in every deck. Removal is always something you want in every deck. So just as a general piece of advice, taking good removal with your first pick and keeping open to the archetypes is usually a good idea. That's usually what I do in most formats. Not all cards in the set are going to be mentioned here either. Just because I don't mention it here doesn't mean a card's not playable. There are some cards that are just playable in every archetype that has that color in it, so it's not necessary to mention it. These are cards that I've probably already mentioned as best commons and uncommons, or best rares in other videos. So just keep in mind, I'm not talking about the only cards that should be in these decks if you have the archetypes. I'm just talking about the cards that lend themselves to the important synergies. And there are also some cards in this video that are going to overlap in archetypes because they're good in multiple archetypes, but not a lot of them. Alright, so the first archetype we're going to talk about is the black-green archetype. And the black-green gold card, as you can see here, is Shaman of the Pack. One black and a green for a 3/2, already passes the vanilla test. And when it enters the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to the number of elves you control. So this seems like it could be an incredibly powerful card, assuming there are enough elves in Magic Origins to support it. And I'm here to say that there are. And in fact, there are other cards, in addition to Shaman of the Shaman of the Pack, that support elves and that have relevance for whether or not you have elves in play. And we're going to talk about those first. And I'm only talking about the ones that are common and uncommon first. We're also going to talk about rares in this video. But the commons and uncommons are usually the most important because you'll see them the most. First example we have of a card uncommon that cares about elves is a card that is itself an elf, 1 and a green for a 2/2, so a bear. And then if you control another elf, you get to put a 1/1 elf warrior creature token onto the battlefield. So it helps you go wider if you already control some other elves. And there are plenty of elves in this format. Another card, this next card I think is probably the best card of all the cards that should make you think about playing elves. And that's Eyeblight Massacre, which is 2 and 2 black. Non-elf creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. So if you build an elf deck, this card's going to be incredible. It'll be good in non-elf decks too, but it's the best in elf decks because you can just, it's a one-sided board sweeper, or at least a one-sided, you can at least get a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 pretty easily, and your guys go unharmed. So it's a very good card. Next up, we have Gnarlroot Trapper, who's pretty good. He's not incredible. He's a card that only people in the elf archetype will want. The first two cards we talked about are cards anyone would want. But this Gnarlroot Trapper, who's a 1-mana 1/1, you can also tap him to pay 1 life, add green to your mana pool. You can only spend this mana to create an elf creature spell, and you can also tap him to give an attacking elf death touch, both of which are strong abilities. But you have to be in the elf archetype. This isn't a card I'd pick up early ever. It'll wheel if no one else is in the elf archetype, in which case you should probably take it. If you see this guy wheel, it means the elf archetype is open. because he's a good in the elf archetype. He helps you ramp into things sooner, and he helps you give your elves death touch. And he's an elf himself, which, as we've seen with Dwynen's Elite, is relevant. So if you play your Root Trapper turn 1, Dwynen's Elite turn 2, you have 4 power on the table on turn 2. So they go pretty well together. And the last card we have that cares about elves is Sylvan Messenger. And again, this is one only people who are in the elf deck are going to be going after. It's 3 and a green for 2/2 with Trample. Not exactly sure why they gave it Trample. 2/2 with Trample isn't especially intimidating. I guess you can pump it and stuff. And it also has, when Sylvan Messenger enters the battlefield, reveal the top 4 cards of your library and put all elves revealed this way into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So if you're building an elf deck, and you have about 12 elves in your deck, let's say, which I think is possible, as we'll see, especially, I think the elf deck can probably only support 1 person at the table, maybe 2, but the 1 person at the table could really make a strong deck. But if you have 12 or so elves in your deck, your chances of hitting at least 2 elves at this are good, and your chances of hitting 1 elf with it are incredible. So, it's a 2/2 body that gets you another elf into your hand, gets you some card advantage. So, yeah, the first 2 are both, Dwynen's Elite and Eyeblight Massacre are good outside of the elf archetype. The other 2 were really only good in the elf archetype. So if you see Sylvan Messenger and Root Trapper late, I'd say elves are open and you should try to go for it. I think it's going to be a fun deck. Anyway, Tribal's always fun in Limited. But in addition to these 4 cards, 5 if we go back to our gold card that we saw earlier, the Shaman of the Pack, in addition to these 5 cards that really care about elves, there are also just a bunch of playable elves that are available to help support this archetype further. We've got Deadbridge Shaman, who I mentioned is one of the best black commons. It's a 3 mana 3/1. When it dies, target opponent discards a card. It's going to 2 for 1 opponents all the time. However, it is a card that other archetypes are going to be wanting as well, because it's just a very good card in general. But it is an elf, so it has some synergies with all the other elf stuff we've seen. Then we have Elvish Visionary. He's a good card in general too. People will be after the Elvish Visionary a little bit, not as much as Deadbridge Shaman, but Elvish Visionary will be a later pick that people will be happy to play in any green deck. But you can pick them up earlier if you've already got a lot of elf synergies by pack 3. Then it's really good because you have elf synergies and it draws you a card and gives you a body, so it gives you some card advantage. So it's a good card to have. Next we have Eyeblight Assassin. Unfortunately, another elf. Other archetypes will be after, other decks. Any black deck will probably want it. It's 3 mana for a 2/2 elf. And when it comes into play, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn. It's a really good black card, black creature, because you can either use it before combat to make your opponents less want to block. Let's say they have a 2/2 in play and you have a 2/2 who can swing. You can give their blocker -1/-1 and swing away. And you can also, in post-combat, use it to finish off a creature that didn't quite die in combat. It can also just kill creatures with 1 toughness, like our Elvish Visionary or a Deadbridge Shaman to its left. Next we have Leaf Gilder, who's a fine green card. Other green decks are going to be after him too, but the elf deck should value it a little higher if you feel yourself going into the elf deck. It's a 2 mana 2/1 who can help you ramp. It adds green, pretty basic card. Then we have Llanowar Empath, which is a very good card, I think. I think it's one of the better green commons in the set. It's 4 mana for a 2/2 elf. And it's kind of like a poor man's version of the elf we saw earlier that lets you look at the top 4 cards of your library and put elves into your hand. This lets you scry 2 and then reveal the top card of your library. And if it's a creature card, you put it into your hand. If you're in an elf deck, you're going to have a lot of creatures, so the Empath will fit best in the elf deck. Other archetypes will want it, but not as much as this one will be less drafted, I think, than the other elves that we see here, because it's better in a really creature-heavy deck, which green can be too, of course, but I think all of these basically just have more value in an elf deck. Next, we have Yaeva's Force Mage. Personally, I'd say it's the weakest card of all of these common elves that are playable. It's kind of the flip side of Eyeblight Assassin. It's 3 mana for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, it pumps another creature by +2/+2. So it can help one of your creatures get through for a swing, or make it so one of your creatures can maybe trade with something bigger, things like that. Yaeva's Force Mage onto Deadbridge Shaman is something pretty mean you could do. Swing with your 5/3, and then they're really, in a deep situation where they either have to just take 5 or get 2 for 1. So that's a nice little combo. So there are a lot of common elves. There are a few uncommons that we saw. All of the cards that really care about elves are uncommon or higher. So that's something to think about. It may not always come together. You may not get the right uncommons, but if you get them, there are plenty of common elves for you to pick up that you should keep your eyes out for, and these are the guys to keep you guys open for. There are also 2 rare elves in the set, one of which has a lot of elf synergy, and one of them is the elf lord in the set is Dwynnin Gilt-Leaf Dane, 4 mana for 3/4 reach, already pretty good. And then it has other elf creatures you control get +1/+1. And on top of that, it has whenever Dwynnin Gilt-Leaf Dane attacks, you gain 1 life for each attacking elf you control. This effect includes Dwynnin himself or herself. So that's a card that people will take highly. It may not be first pickable if there's premium removal in a pack, but people who aren't even considering making elves, this is a good serviceable, more than serviceable. It's a good rare to have. But if you pick it up, say first pick because your pack has no good removal in it or something like that, you should think about going into elves because it's really good in the elf deck. The other one we have is another card. This one I think is first pickable. It'll be first picked all the time. So unfortunately, including it here is a little, kind of useless, I guess, unless you happen to open it and pack 3 and you're already well in the elf deck. But it is an elf and it's a good one. It's 5 mana for 3 with Menace, Gilt-Leaf Winnower, and when it comes into play, it can destroy a non-elf creature whose power and toughness are not equal. So that's sort of an overview of elves. I think it'll be a strong archetype, but I don't think, as I said earlier, it'll be able to support more than one drafter at the table going deep into elves. But like I said, if you're seeing some of the common and especially uncommon elves late, like Shaman of the Pack and things like that, somewhere in the middle of even first pack, then that archetype is open. And if I were drafting, which I will be, in a few weeks when it's on Magic Online, I would move into elves after I see those things are open and just try to build as cohesive and synergistic of an elf deck as I can. It'll be really strong when it comes together, but it's going to be it's not going to always come together, I guess is what I'm saying. But you also don't have to go full-blown into the elf archetype. Like I was saying, the archetypes aren't hard and fast like they are in some of the other sets we've seen recently. It's kind of open-ended. You could just build a black-green deck with a bunch of good cards in it that happen to have a few elves in it, and many of these cards are good even if you just have a few elves in your deck. So the next archetype we'll discuss is the blue-red archetype. That does it for the black-green archetype. And the blue-red archetype is artifacts. We have Reclusive Artificer as the card that Wizards printed sort of as the exemplar of what the blue-red archetype is. And Reclusive Artificer, 4 mana for a 2/3 haste. Not something that's super exciting, but when it enters the battlefield, you may have it deal damage to target creature equal to the number of artifacts you control. So this one has a removal spell attached to it, which is really strong. But he's not very good at all if you don't have artifacts. So he's not going to be drafted highly in the first pack. He's another one that's a good signal. If you see it 6th, 7th, 8th pick still sticking around, that you might want to try to move into this archetype, just like the Shaman of the Pack was in the other set. It's, removals. He can knock the block out of the way and then swing for 2. And you can end up taking down a lot of really big creatures because this is an archetype that I think, of all of the archetypes, I think Wizards supported this one the most strongly, which is interesting. The archetypes aren't all sort of evenly distributed. Some are much more strongly supported than others. Elves are pretty strongly supported, but I think artifacts are even more strongly supported and are perhaps the strongest, most strongly supported archetype of all the archetypes. So we'll talk about some commons and uncommons that care about artifacts. And we have Artificer's Epiphany, which is a card draw spell. It's one that isn't good at all if you don't have artifacts. No one's going to be drafting this early. Don't pick this one up early. Even if you're in the artifact archetype, it'll probably wheel back to you because drawing 2 and discarding 1 for 3 isn't very good. But if you're in the artifact deck, paying 3 to draw 2 is a pretty good effect at instant speed. I think it's a good card, but only if you're in the artifact archetype. And it's a common, so you'll see plenty of them floating around. You probably don't want more than 1 or 2 in your deck, but if you're in the artifact archetype. Next we have an uncommon, Girapur Aether Grid. And it's an enchantment that says tap 2 untapped artifacts you control. Gear per Aether Grid deals 1 damage to target creature or player. And now this is a very strong card if you're in the artifact archetype. It's another one that won't be picked early, unless someone's really trying to force the artifact archetype. It won't be picked early because it's not good until you have a bunch of artifacts. I'd say you need 8 or 9 artifacts or things that generate artifacts for the Aether Grid to be worth it, and maybe more than that. But if you do have those, it's incredibly good. It can basically become your win condition, and it can also hit creatures, so it can work as removal. And it's not an easy thing to remove. Once it's in play, you're going to be in a really advantageous situation, assuming you have enough artifacts to support it. Next up, we have Thopter Engineer. There's a whole bunch of creatures in this in this format that generate colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens, and so they're not actually artifacts. Most of them. There's one I'll talk about later that is, but they all make artifact tokens that can work with your Gear per Aether Grid and work with your Artificer's Epiphany. And these cards are all in blue and red, and there are a number of them, and we're going to talk about all of them here, of course. And this one's very good because it's 3 mana for a 1/3, which isn't an amazing rate, but it's fine. But she puts a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying on the battlefield, and then it also says artifact creatures you control have haste. So this means every Thopter token you have come out for the rest of the game, or any other artifact creature you have that comes out for the rest of the game, will have haste. And that's a pretty big deal because the Thopter creature tokens all have evasion. It'll also make your opponent play more defensively once they see you or they're in this archetype, and you could play out big artifacts that could just smash into them right away. It's just a very good card, Thopter Engineer is. And it's something you'll really want in this archetype. It's one that'll also be picked by anybody. So this one is one of the cards that's worth picking up early, even if you're not sure that you're going to go into that archetype. It's good no matter what. It's 3 mana for 2 power, one of which is flying. Anything that generates 2 bodies is usually pretty good. And I think this will be a card that you'll see picked somewhere between like the 3rd and 5th pick in some packs. And I think it's worth picking up early, just if you know you're in red, not if you know you're in this archetype per se. Next we have Whirler Rogue, which I think is the best blue uncommon in the set. It's a very good card, 2 and 2 blue for 2/2, and it puts 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying out of the battlefield, and it has tap 2 untapped artifacts you control. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. So that's an incredibly powerful effect. It's important to remember that when you put those Thopter tokens into play, you can immediately tap them and make one of your creatures unblockable, and then swing with some big guy on the ground if you want to. So it's a good card. It's another one that'll be picked early. And you should pick early, whether or not you're going to be in the artifact archetype. Whirler Rogue will be a high pick. It will put you in blue probably, unless blue ends up not being open. But you don't have to go into the artifact archetype for it to be strong. It is stronger if you're in the artifact archetype because you can just tap down a bunch of artifacts and make all your guys unblockable. But it's good in a vacuum as well. Next we have Chief of the Foundry. This is one that won't really be picked up early. It's one that if you see late, I think is a really good signal that the artifact archetype is open, and that you might want to move into it. It's an artifact lord, 3 for a 2/3, which is an all right rate, and other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1. People who aren't in the artifact archetype who are desperate for a creature might draft him because 3 for a 2/3 isn't an awful rate, especially when it's colorless. But this card is obviously much better in the artifact archetype, and again, seeing it late, great signal that you should think about moving into artifacts. Next we have Ram Roller, which is a 3 mana 2/3. It's the new one in the cycle of the Juggernauts. Juggernaut cards have been printed a long time. They all attack each turn if able. And if you control another artifact, this card's exactly like Juggernaut, except 1 mana cheaper. Becomes a 5/3 that attacks each turn if able, and that's pretty good. But again, this guy will occasionally, I guess, be drafted by people not in the artifact archetype, but even more if they're in desperation, because its setback is very real, especially if it's only a 2/3 that it has to attack every turn. But if you can make it a 5/3, it's really great. So if you see Ram Roller, Chief of the Foundry, or Gear per Aether Grid late, I'd say pick them up. Late in pack 1, pick them up and move into the artifact archetype because that archetype is clearly open. Artificer's Epiphany, you'll see late all the time. I don't think it's a big signal because it's a card that's just awful in any archetype but this one. You can wait to pick them up until late usually. But there are also a few other cards that support the archetype that don't just care about artifacts, but generate artifact tokens and things like that. One of these is Gear Crafter, which is one of the better red commons in the set. I've compared him to Sandstep Outcast in other videos. He's a 3-mana 2/1. And when he enters the battlefield, you get a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying, and it comes into the battlefield. So you're paying 3 for 3 power, one of which has evasion, so it's very good. And it's a card that'll be picked by a lot of people, just like Sandstep Outcast was, not only by people in this specific artifact archetype, but you should still be able to snag a couple of them if you move into the artifact archetype, since he's at common and all 3 packs are the same here. We've also got Aspiring Aeronaut, not as good as our Gear Crafter. 4 mana for a 1/2 flyer, who puts another 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token flying in the battlefield. This is one that I don't think will be drafted that highly by people outside of the artifact archetype. You are paying 4 for 2 flying damage in the air, but it's just not that great of a rate. It's a fine card. Some blue decks who are looking for some more flyers near the end of the game to win the game in the late game might pick this up. But I think if you see him around late, you should pick him up. In the first pack, because he's playable in any blue deck, I think, but he's only great in the artifact archetype. Then we have a few artifacts that are just good. One of which is Throwing Knife, which again is one that people outside the archetype will also be after. But it's very good equipment, which is strange to say outside of rare. We haven't had a good equipment at uncommon or common in quite a while. But this one's good. It's Throwing Knife, as I said, 2 mana for an artifact equipment. You can pay 2 to equip it, and the equipped creature gets +2/+0. That already is, fringe playable. It's not great. But the other thing it has is what makes it so good, and it's whenever a equipped creature attacks, you can sacrifice Throwing Knife, and if you do, it deals 2 damage to target creature or player. So it can act as a removal spell. It's a much better version of Vial of Dragonfire in a lot of ways, which was in Dragons of Tarkir as the 2 mana artifact. Pay 2, tap it, do 2 damage to target creature. This kind of does the same thing, except you get to pump a creature in the meantime until you decide it's the time to use it. Next up, we have Angel's Tomb. This one isn't incredible. I think it's actually an artifact that might be better in some of the other archetypes that play even more creatures than this artifact archetype does. So it's 3 mana. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, the Angel's Tomb becomes a 3/3 white angel artifact creature with flying until end of turn. It's probably still worth grabbing at least one of if you can get it. If you're in this archetype, you are going to be playing a lot of creatures. We have all these artificers that put Thopter tokens into play that you'll hopefully have multiples of in an ideal world. And the Angel's Tomb will be set off by those as well. And it's a decent card. It's not incredible in this archetype, but it is an artifact that's playable that can support the archetype. Then we have a Goldforged Sentinel. He's basically Scion of Ugin, which we saw recently in Dragons of Tarkir, I think. I can never remember if it's in Fate Reforged or Dragons, but it's a good card. It's not an incredible one by any means, but if you're in this archetype, you probably want him because he's a 6 mana 4/4 with flying, which is pretty baseline, pretty average, solid card. Not something you're going to want desperately. And he is one that other people are going to pick up to some degree. But he's obviously best in your archetype, where the more artifacts, the better. And next up, we have Sigil of Valor, which I think will actually be very good in this archetype and probably at its best in this archetype. It's another piece of equipment that's actually playable. It's 2 mana, and you equip it for 1. And whenever a equipped creature attacks alone, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each other creature you control. So in this format, in this archetype rather, you're going to be generating a lot of Thopter tokens. You're going to be able to go pretty wide on your opponent, but sometimes they lock up the sky or the ground or whatever, and you can't get through for the damage you need to. The Sigil of Valor can make it so you can. I think it's because of all the Thopter tokens, it's good. I would say to run Sigil of Valor, you probably need at least 4 creatures that generate Thopter tokens. 4 creatures that come into play with at least one other dude for Sigil of Valor to be good. But that should be entirely doable in this archetype. So I think the Sigil of Valor, on top of being an artifact, has synergy with the ability to go wide that this blue-red artifact deck has. And the last playable I have on here is Guardians of Meletis. It's not incredible. It's a 3 mana 0/6. But I think it'll be good in this archetype because most of your best threats and creatures have flying, and you're going to want to win in the long run by swinging with a bunch of Thopter tokens in the sky or a Goldforged Sentinel or something. And it locks up the ground in addition to having all the artifact synergies, other things that it has with the other cards. You know, you can also use it to do damage with the Girapur Ether Grid and things like that. So I think Guardians of Meletis is a playable common or uncommon artifact that supports this archetype just by virtue of being an artifact and by virtue of locking down the ground while you can swing away in the air. There are a few other artifacts that I didn't mention here. If I didn't mention them here, I don't think they're especially playable at this point. My mind may change when we get to when I actually start drafting. You know, I'm not necessarily going to be right about all these things because once you start playing, certain things that don't look good end up being better than you thought, and things that you thought were going to be good end up not being as good as you thought. But right now, I think this is sort of the shell you would want for your artifact deck, and I think at the heart of it, you want at least 4 of these guys who generate Thopter tokens if you really want to have a lot of success. There's also a number of rares that support the archetype, and the thing about these rares is I'd say they're all first pickable. So if you pick them up early, there's no reason not to sort of be looking into drafting the artifact archetype. Like if you open one of these in pack 1, pick one, looking into the artifact archetype is probably where you want to go. If it ends up not being open, you know, actually they're not all playable. I was going to say they're all playable, but they're not. Some of them are playable and some of them aren't. I'll talk more in detail about them individually. Hangerback Walker, I think, is playable on his own, even if you don't have the artifact archetype rolling. He's probably first pickable a lot of the time. If your pack doesn't have premium removal spells in it or one of the really good uncommons in the set, I could see taking Hangerback Walker, pack 1, pick 1. And he enters the battlefield, he's XX, enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. When it dies, you put a 1/1 Thopter artifact creature token with flying onto the battlefield for each counter on Hangerback Walker. And these kinds of creatures are always great. These kinds of creatures that, when they die, punish your opponent. You know, they get you card advantage in a way. If your opponent uses removal on this guy or you trade with this guy, you end up just getting value out of it. And on top of that, he has 1 tap, and you can put a +1/+1 counter on him just to make him bigger and bigger, and even more of a threat in the late game. You know, the later the game goes on, if your opponent ever kills him, it'll be worse for them almost if they kill him late, but he'll just keep getting bigger. So he's a very good creature that you would want in general. I can see him being first pickable a lot of the time. The next one we have is Thopter Spy Network. I don't think this one's first pickable. I think it is if you're in pack 2, pick 1, and you're firmly in the artifact archetype, then by all means, Thopter Spy Network is definitely a first pick. At the beginning of every one of your upkeeps for 2 and 2 blue mana as an enchantment, this thing puts a 1/1 Thopter artifact creature token with flying onto the battlefield. And whenever 1 or more artifact creatures you control deal combat damage to player, draw a card. It's important to note, this isn't something I realized when I first read it. When I first read it, I thought it meant every time an artifact creature you control deals damage, you get to draw a card. It doesn't, because it says 1 or more. So even if you swing with 8 Thopter tokens at your opponent and they all hit him for 8, you still only draw 1 card, which is good still, but not as it seemed like crazy broken to me when I first saw it. But it's not quite as broken as I thought. But it does generate a Thopter token every turn, but you have to have an artifact in play for that to happen. So as I said, this isn't first pickable unless someone's really wanting to force artifacts for whatever reason, which I wouldn't recommend, because if you pick this up and then if someone else is in artifacts or a couple other people are, then it's not going to be good if you can't get a number of artifacts. To run it, I'd say you probably need at least 8 or 9 artifact or artifact token generators in your deck for Thopter Spy Network to be good. And again, that's very doable, as we've seen in this archetype, with the number of common and uncommon artifacts we have. And last but least is what I think is the best of the rares that support the archetype. This is another one that I would just first pick no matter what. I don't think there's even any premium removal I would take over them. I think they're one of the better red rares. Maybe even the best red rare, but it's very high for me on the list of red rares. 2 and 2 red for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you put 2 Thopter artifact creature tokens on the battlefield. And it has sack an artifact for 2 and a red, and it pings a player or a person for 2 damage. So it's a pretty huge effect. Can work as removal. This is good in a vacuum because it generates its own artifacts to sacrifice. But if you take this early, say pack 1, pick 1, then I think you definitely are going to want to consider moving into looking to see if the artifact archetype is open for you. If it is, then this thing will get stronger and stronger as your draft goes on. If it's not, you're still happy to have this card. So as you can see, like I said, this archetype is probably the most thoroughly supported of any of these archetypes we're going to talk about. I think it's actually probably the strongest of all the archetypes because it's so well supported. And I think that when you can pull this deck off, it's going to be an incredibly powerful deck. If you can make it happen, which I think there'll be one drafter at every table who can probably pull this deck off. So that's something to keep in mind. They do seem to have tried to balance the fact that this is one of the stronger, most supported archetypes in the set with the fact that they did print a bunch of artifact hate, but it's only in green and red. We have Caustic Caterpillar, who I don't think is playable main board, but green decks will happily side that in against you after they, get trounced by your artifacts in round 1. And there's also Conclave Naturalists. This is something that'll be main boarded anyway, but it's something to keep in mind your green opponent might have. It's a good card anyway. It's 5 for a 4/4, and by turn 5 in this set where there's lots of auras and lots of artifacts, it's going to be good. So people main board it. Smash to Smithereens is the red card. Most people are going to want to side in against you. It's a very good red card. Burns you for 3 and nukes your artifact for 2. Demolish isn't that good. It's sorcery speed, can destroy an artifact or land. You're almost never going to see it, but an opponent who's really desperate might side it in against you if they didn't pick up Smash to Smithereens. One thing to note is while these can be somewhat punishing for you, a lot of times they're only going to be able to hit, say, your Thopter tokens or things like that. They're more often probably going to go after things like the good equipments we talked about, or the 4/4 flyer for 6. But there's a lot of, even though they printed these things, like if they blow up your Hangerback Walker, you don't really care, I don't think. So, you're just getting more advantage out of it. They didn't print any artifact sweepers in this set, so you don't need to worry about those. But yeah, so there is artifact hate to sort of keep in the back of your mind, but I don't think it punishes the deck enough, and I think the red-blue archetype is going to run a little bit wild in this format. So that does it for the red-blue archetype. Next, we move on to the blue-black archetype. Our blue-black uncommon rare that Wizards has said sort of exemplifies the format is Possessed Scab. 3 a blue and a black. When it enters the battlefield, you return target instant, sorcery, or creature card from your graveyard to your hand. If it would die, you do have to exile it, which is a little bit of a disappointment considering black does have ways to reanimate things. But this is actually, I think, a very good card. It's 5 mana for a decent body, a 3/2, nothing incredible, and it gets you basically anything but a land or an enchantment from your graveyard. So he's very good, and he's not quite as obvious, as the first 2 archetypes we looked at, which were like elves and artifacts clearly. But the blue-black archetype here is going to be all about cards that care about your graveyard and manipulating your graveyard, which is partly why they probably made this guy exile himself, because he'd be even crazier if you could just keep bringing him back, because there is enough synergy to do that in blue-black. So graveyard manipulation is our theme here. And here are some commons and uncommons that care about cards in your graveyard that I think are playable. One of them is Deep Sea Terror. It's a 6 mana 6/6, which sounds great, right? But it can't attack unless there's 7 or more cards in your graveyard. It's still a very good blocker as a 6 mana 6 for 6, but this is a card that if you find yourself having picked up some of the other cards we're going to talk about, Deep Sea Terror is something that you definitely want in your deck. It'll be around late. If you can mill yourself some and play your Deep Sea Terror, you'll be really happy because it's just easy. And like I said, it'll be around late. It's a common. You'll see lots of them. Probably don't want more than 1 or 2 in your deck, so it'll probably be really easy to get one. Don't prioritize this card at all. If you find yourself in this archetype, you'll get one. I can almost guarantee you. And then we also have Necromantic Summons, which I think is a very good black uncommon. 5 mana to reanimate any creature from any graveyard, but then it has Spell Mastery, which, incidentally, in these blue-black archetype, that will dump cards into your graveyard and reanimate cards from your graveyard. It's pretty easy to get. If you have the spell mastery, you get to put 2+1/+1 counters on the creature you get back. So Necromantic Summonings your Deep Sea Terror back into play. Pretty terrifying for your opponent. But don't forget you can hit your opponent's bombs too, which makes it even crazier. So it's a good card it's just a good uncommon in general. I think it's a very playable uncommon. Next we have Revenant, who's all right. He's another one who will definitely be around late, like the Deep Sea Terror. He's 5 mana for a star flyer. His power and toughness are each equal to the number of creature cards just in your graveyard. Something to remember. It's not all graveyards. It's not that good. But if you're in this archetype, which does have the capability to dump cards in your graveyard, which we're going to talk about in a moment, Revenant is very good. Even if he's just a 5 mana 3/3 flyer when he comes into play, that's a decent rate, and it stands a good chance that he's just going to get bigger and bigger. So I think if you end up with the right cards, Revenant is good. But again, he'll be around late. Don't pick him early, even if you're in this archetype. He'll come back to you unless someone else is in the archetype. But even then, it's not a huge loss to lose Revenant. Necromantic Summons is a card that's just good in general, incidentally. Anybody would pick that, but it's best in this archetype. Scab Goliath is one of the best blue uncommons in the set, I think. And he's at his best in this archetype. Other people might pick him up if they feel they have enough ways to get creatures in their graveyard. But your archetype, this archetype, which has many ways to dump cards in the graveyard, as we'll see in a second, is where he's at his finest. He's a 6 mana 6/9 with trample and an additional cast to cost him. You do have to exile 2 creature cards from your graveyard. So Revenant and Scab Goliath you probably don't want in the same deck. If you have a choice, run Scab Goliath. He's much better than the Revenant is, I think. He's another one who getting back with Necromantic Summons is pretty disgusting for your opponent. He'll come back as a 8/11 with trample. And you don't have to pay the additional cost when he comes into play with Necromantic Summons. So he's very good in this archetype. And then we have Send to Sleep, which also cares about your graveyard. I kind of have it here as a general placeholder for all Spell Mastery cards. Spell Mastery is good in any deck. Is something important to keep in mind, but it's very good in this deck, which will be dumping cards in its own graveyard for all of these cards with those sorts of synergies. And Send to Sleep's a good card that does that. It can tap down creatures, and if you have Spell Mastery, it basically crippling chills 2 creatures. So that's very good for 2 mana. But it's sort of a stand-in there for all Spell Masteries. There's more of them that are playable. I just didn't think I needed to talk about every single one of them. Next up, we have Undead Servant, who I do think is one of the better of this cycle of cards. There's this cycle of cards that all get better the more copies of it you have in your deck or in play. And Undead Servant, I think, is the best one. He's 4 mana for a 3/2 zombie, which is relevant. Zombies matter in this format because of Cruel Revival. And when he enters the battlefield, you get to put a 2/2 black zombie creature token on the battlefield for each card named Undead Servant in your graveyard. Now, it's pretty easy to get them in your graveyard, either by playing them earlier or by dumping them into your graveyard directly from your library. And this is a card that, like, once you have 2 of them, each one that you pick up from then out just gets ridiculously strong. You're going to want these guys in your graveyard because when you play your 4th Undead Servant, you're going to be paying 4 mana for a ludicrous amount of power. But even if you just have 1 in your graveyard, you're paying 4 mana for 6 power. So Undead Servant just starts to get ridiculous, especially in this archetype. I think he's a real star of this archetype, and he's good to keep in mind. There's also Shadows of the Past, which I do think is very playable. I think this card's pretty polarizing based on what I've seen other people say about it. It's 1 and a black for an enchantment, and it has whenever a creature dies, scry 1. That alone, I think, is pretty good. It helps make your deck more consistent, helps you find the things you need to, make your deck roll. But then on top of that, it has play 4 and a black. Each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. Activate this ability only if there are 4 or more creature cards in your graveyard. Again, you probably don't want Scab Goliath and Shadows of the Past in the same deck because Scab Goliath, jettisons your creatures. But having one of them, I think, is very good to have in your deck. I think Shadows of the Past can be this color pair also has a lot of removal. Some of the most removal in the set, which we're not really talking about here. So if you can stall the game long enough, you can just win with Shadows of the Past. I mean, if you get 10 mana in play, your opponent can't really beat you. And you can scry for lands to help you get there if you need to, especially if the game's like sort of stalled and you really need to get lands. So you can just start Shadows of the Pasting for 4 every turn. So I think Shadows of the Past is very good in this archetype, which will get 4 creatures in the graveyard fairly easily. And then we have Cruel Revival. It is a removal spell I'm talking about because it destroys a creature and then returns a zombie card from your graveyard to your hand. So we've got Undead Servant here and Scab Goliath. But there are a number of other zombies in the format that are just like sort of filler zombies, like Shambling Corpse or whatever it is, which is 1 and a black for 2/3, comes into play tapped. He's fine. He would be in this deck. He'd be in any deck, any black deck. He's just a fine filler card. And Cruel Revival can kill a dude, and get him back. And if you mill yourself, which we'll see the ways to do that in a moment, Cruel Revival also can get you back a card that you wouldn't have been able to play otherwise because you milled it. So here are the commons and uncommons that dump cards in your graveyard. The first of these is Returned Centaur. I think he's the best of the ones that we're going to talk about here. He's 4 mana for 2/4, already a decent rate, but he also mills the top 4 cards of your library into your graveyard when he enters the battlefield. Also, he's a zombie, so you can get him back and mill yourself again with Cruel Revival, trying to set up all the cards we just talked about. So I think he's a fine card. He's a good blocker. Can even attack when he needs to, and he helps mill you and helps your strategy go. Then we have Screeching Scab, who's 2 mana for 2/1, and he mills the top 2 cards of your graveyard, a lot like Sultai Skullkeeper, who we saw recently, who had a lot of success. Not a lot of success, some success. You only drafted him if you had multiple Delve cards in the Khans of Tarkir Fate Reforged draft. But he was playable there, and this guy's playable here because the archetype for milling yourself is here too, although it's not quite as pronounced as Delve was in that format in Khans of Tarkir. And then we have Towergeist, who's just a good card in general. This will be one that anyone would take fairly early too. I could see him going 3rd to 5th pick depending on what else is in the pack. 4 mana for 2/2 flyer, who you look at the top 2 cards of your library. 1 goes in your hand, 1 goes in your graveyard. So he doesn't put a huge number of things in your graveyard, but he can still help you in the long run by getting a good number of cards in your graveyard to turn some of your other cards on. But again, he'll be someone that anybody would want to take no matter what their archetype is, as long as they're blue anyway. Dreadwaters is the last one we have here. This one's probably the most questionable for me. I'm not sure how viable this one will be. It's 4 mana sorcery. Target player puts the top X cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, where X is the number of lands you control, but it's a sorcery, which is always annoying. You have to do it on your turn and, probably pass your turn, basically. But it does have a chance to mill a bunch of good things to power up your Revenant or your Serpent that can only attack if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, and things like that. So that one's the one I'm least sure about how playable it is. But you can self-mill with it and turn on a lot of your other cards. I think if you can just get a couple Returned Centaurs and a couple Screeching Scabs, you're probably set for this archetype in terms of dumping things in your graveyard. Other cards will go in your graveyard no matter what, so that's important to keep in mind. There's not a lot that puts cards in your graveyard, but the 2 cards that I think are best for it at dumping cards in your graveyard, which are the Scab and the Centaur, will be around all the time, late or in the middle, so you can pick them up to sort of solidify you in this archetype. So that's important to remember. So in addition to these cards, there's also a few rares and mythics which have graveyard synergy. That if you pick them, that sounded strange, didn't it? If you pick early or see, in later packs, are cards you're going to want to take for this archetype. So one of them is Despoiler of Souls, 2 mana for 3/1. It's a fine rate, it can't block. And then it can just keep coming back from your graveyard as long as you have other creature cards in your graveyard to exile. Now, it's kind of a non-bow with Scab Goliath and other cards that care about creature cards in our graveyard. But if you have other cards that care about creature cards in the graveyard, or cards in your graveyard in general, it's a good card to have. I don't think he'll be a really high pick. You can probably get him, relatively late, and he'll be pretty good in the archetype, more so than in any other deck. Mythic we have that's good with this archetype is Disciple of the Ring. It can only exile instants and sorcery cards, but you'll have enough of them in your graveyard for this thing to be a threat. It's this modal mythic, which I really like. I always like modal effects like this. 1, exile an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard and choose one. You can counter a non-creature spell as the controller pays 2. You can pump your Disciple of the Ring, who's already a relatively reasonable 5 mana 3/4. And you can tap and untap creatures at instant speed. So it's a pretty good effect. It's a mythic. You're not going to see it a lot. I don't think it's actually super first pickable. You have to end up in one of a couple archetypes, either this one or the blue-white one, which we'll talk about later, for it to be really effective. So I don't think it'll be highly picked. It's also probably not going to be worth a whole lot. I don't think it'll show up in any constructed decks. Maybe in Standard it could make a go. So it's not going to be highly picked. It's something that I would take, somewhere 5th or 6th pick, if it's still around. I would consider trying to make this archetype work, in part because of the Disciple of the Ring. And as we've seen, there are also a lot of other cards with these synergies. Another one we have who sort of fits it, but doesn't exactly, is Erebos' Titan. He's a 4 mana 5/5, but it's triple black, pretty hard to cast. And he has Indestructible as long as your opponents control no creatures, which is kind of a silly effect, really. Sometimes it could be relevant. Something to keep in mind is if your opponent has one creature in play, and they try to destroy your Erebos' Titan, you can in response destroy their creature, and your Titan becomes indestructible. And the effect that he has that's really relevant for this deck is if a creature leaves an opponent's graveyard, you can discard a card. If you do, return Erebos' Titan from your graveyard to your hand. Now, that's almost never going to happen in this format, unfortunately, except for that we do have the black card in this format. I can't remember its name. Let me go back real quick. We're going all the way back to Necromantic Summons. That's it. We have that card. Now we go here again. We have that card, which we can actually use as sort of a combo. So you're gonna pick Erebos' Titan and Necromantic Summons, even if you're just a black deck, and those two cards will work really well together. You can steal your opponent's creature, discard one of your own cards, and return Erebos' Titan from your graveyard to your hand, and then you have your Titan back on your next turn. It's a pretty cool effect. I kind of have them on here just sort of because of that effect, that combo that you can have between an uncommon and a mythic. So it's not going to happen very often, but it'll happen sometimes. But there aren't any other cards that do anything with the graveyard, so the Titan's usually just going to be a 4 mana 5/5, which is good, but not incredible. Another mythic we have who has some relevance for this archetype is Jace, Vryn's Prodigy. He's the only looter in the whole set, which is a little disappointing. He's a 2 mana 0/2, as you probably know. And you can tap him, draw a card, then discard a card. So he lets you loot, which lets you throw cards in your graveyard that you can get back or can be used to activate spell masteries or anything else. Just fill up your graveyard for all the cards we saw earlier. And if after that you have 5 or more cards in your graveyard, you exile Jace, and he returns to the battlefield transformed under his owner's control. In some ways, I almost wish he didn't transform. His looting ability is more important for this deck than his transformation ability. And he's going to transform pretty quickly in this deck. I mean, unless you play him on turn 2 and he's the main way you're getting to 5 cards, he's gonna transform probably after his first or second activation of the ability. But what he transforms into doesn't have no synergy with your graveyard. He's all right. I think I've said in other videos he's the weakest of these planeswalkers, at least in limited, probably in constructed too, though. His ability that matters for this archetype is that you can make one of the cards in your graveyard have flashback, essentially. You can cast an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn for his -3 ability, and you'll have those in your graveyard just because you've cast them and also because they've been dumped in your graveyard. But his flipped side doesn't really have a huge amount of synergy with this archetype. Now, a card who does have a lot of synergy with this archetype, and who I think is a very good rare, is Graveblade Marauder, a 3 mana 1/4 with Death Touch. And whenever Graveblade Marauder deals combat damage to a player, that player loses life equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard, which as we've seen through the dumping we can have, and just from trading early, he can just start really hurting the opponent. He's also a creature, your opponent can trade with it if they want to, but it's not always going to be easy to since he's got 4 toughness. So he's going to be a pretty good finisher in this deck, and he can make it work. Plus, you can put a Stratus Walk on him and get really mean. Stratus Walk is, we're going to talk about it later, but it's 1 and a blue for an aura that gives a creature flying and draws a card when it comes into play. So it's pretty playable because it replaces itself, unlike most auras. And giving him flying is just disgusting. So those are the rares and mythics that have graveyard synergy. I think on the whole, this archetype will probably only be all right. Sometimes I think it'll come together and be powerful, especially if you have, Graveblade Marauder or Disciple of the Ring. But you really need to get, returned centaurs and things like that to really make this work. The support for this archetype is pretty inconsistent. There are really only 3 decent cards that help you, 3 decent cards at common and uncommon that help you get cards out of your library and into your graveyard. And that's just not enough, really. I think this can come together sometimes, but I think more often than not, a blue-black deck in this format isn't going to try to make this archetype happen. It may if it starts to pick up some of these rares and it sees what it can do, or even some of the uncommons that are really powerful if you have big graveyards. But most of the time, it's just going to be blue-black has a lot of removal, and it has some good creatures, and you're just going to win in the traditional blue-black, kill a bunch of creatures and swing away with your creatures style, sort of a basic blue-black strategy. But it'll be fun. This archetype, I think, will be fun when you can make it happen, and I hope I can make it happen at least a few times. I'm going to draft the set a lot, so I'm sure it'll happen eventually. The next archetype we're going to look at is the white-black archetype, and its sort of exemplary creature is Bloodcursed Knight, 3 mana, 3/2, which again, it passes the vanilla test, which is always nice. And he has, as long as you control an enchantment, he gets +1/+1 and has lifelink. I think he's a really good one of these gold cards. I think all of these gold cards are very good, basically. You can play all of them. They're all good, all the ones we've seen so far and the ones we will see. But I think he's, in the top third of being one of the stronger ones. Because, as we'll see, getting an enchantment in play for black and white really isn't that difficult. There are a number of playable enchantments in black and white. And he becomes a pretty powerful force to be reckoned with once you have an enchantment in play. And so the enchantments are our theme here. So there are a number of cards at common and uncommon that care about enchantments, one of which is Auramancer. When it enters the battlefield, it's a thing that's been reprinted many times. When it enters the battlefield, you return target enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. And as we'll see in the next slide, there are a number of removals type spells or auras that pump your guys that you'll definitely want to get back with your Auramancer. So it's going to get you card advantage a lot of the time in this deck if you're running the number of enchantments that you need to be running anyway to sort of support this archetype. Next we have Blessed Spirits. And a note on Auramancer is it's a card that will only be picked up by people who are in one of the enchantment-heavy archetypes. And this is the most enchantment-heavy archetype. So I would wait for it to wheel, even if you're in the archetype, because it'll probably get back to you. Blessed Spirits, on the other hand, will be picked by absolutely everyone who's in white. 3 mana, 2/2 for flyer is good. And if you're in white, you're probably already going to have 1 or 2 enchantments, even if you're not in this archetype, so it just gets even better. But this is a card you should probably be picking pretty highly, other than removal, if you're in this archetype, and it's going to be picked highly anyway, I think. But next we have Blightcaster, and this is a guy who I think is one of the key signals that will tell you whether this archetype is open, near the end of your first pack. He's 4 mana for 2/3, not a very good rate. But whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you can give any creature -2/-2 until end of turn. So he's only going to be picked up by people who see this enchantment archetype coming together in the draft. And if he's still around, in the last 6 cards of your first pack, I'd say pick him up and get going on the enchantment archetype, especially if you've already got a few enchantments or you're already in white, because those are the 2 colors for it. And next we have another reprint. Only Blessed Spirits of these 4 is a new card. The rest are all reprints, interestingly. And we have Totem Guide Heartbeast, 5 mana for 2/5. When it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for an aura card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. And these are all cards that care about enchantments. And he cares more specifically about auras, so he's not quite as flexible as the others. But there are white auras that function as removal for black and white, and he can help you grab one of those. He can also grab an aura to slap on himself to make himself stronger. So I think he's playable. He's probably, you've got to have certain cards to make him work. So he's not incredibly playable, but I think he's very good in this archetype. And there are a number of auras and enchantments that are actually playable at common and uncommon this time around. One of these is Grasp of the Heromancer. I don't think it's incredibly playable by any means. The big risk, if you don't know, with auras in limited is the ability to easily get 2 for 1. You slap one of these on your creatures, and then your opponent just kills the creature on his next turn, and he killed effectively 2 of your cards for 1 spell. And that's a big weakness of auras in general. And it's even worse if you try to put the aura on and they have mana open, and in response they destroy the creature. Then you don't even get to do anything with the aura. So I would say the safest thing to do is to wait till your opponent's tapped out, or wait till you know they don't have mana up that can use instant speed removal to use these auras. And so for Grasp of the Heromancer, that's the case too. But I think it's a pretty good one. It's 2 mana for a +1/+1 effect, and whenever the creature has it attacks, it can tap down a creature that the defending player controls, making it easier for you to get through. And it's a reasonable cost for that effect. You do have to look out for the 2 for 1 in it. It doesn't have a way of avoiding it, but I think it's a fine aura, and I think it's borderline fringe playable. It's like a D+ card probably, but it is a card that only people in the aura archetype will want, so it'll be easy for you to get in general. Next we have Infernal Scarring, and I like this one because it actually gets around the whole 2 for 1 effect that many of the other auras have. That can impact them anyway. It's 1 and a black for a +2/+0 effect, and it has whenever the creature dies, draw a card. So you get to replace it after you have it on your creature that's already gotten buffed up and is probably swung. So you can replace it and then get to draw a card. It's not a bad one to get with your Totem Guide Heartbeast. It'll make him into a 4/5. And then the Totem Guide Heartbeast got you it for free already. And then the Infernal Scarring will get you another free card if they manage to kill your Heartbeast. So I think the Infernal Scarring can be especially good there. Another aura that's really strong, and probably the strongest of these 3 so far, which I guess isn't a surprise because it's at uncommon, is Knightly Valor. This is another one that gets around being 2 for 1 somewhat. When it enters the battlefield, you put a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance onto the battlefield, and whatever creature you put Knightly Valor on gets +2/+2 and has vigilance. So even if they manage to kill your creature you put the Valor on, you still get to hold on to a knight, so you still have, you can say like half your card, so you can still get 1 for 1.5 basically on Knightly Valor, but it's still a very good card. Vigilance is a strong ability in limited, and so I think Knightly Valor is going to be really good aura. It'll be at its best again in this archetype, but I think other people will pick it up too just because it's a quality aura. Next we have a removal aura, which is something that you want to get with your Totem Guide Heartbeast or your Auramancer back from your graveyard if you're in trouble, and that is Suppression Bonds. I think it's one of the best white uncommons in the set. So I think it's something that's going to be highly taken, probably first picked by people even if they're not in the aura area. But that's good in some ways because you can pick up Suppression Bonds first pick out of a pack and then just sort of stay open. And then if the other pieces of this archetype start falling together, you have your Suppression Bonds is ready to go, and they're just good in general anyway. But yeah, it enchants any permanent, and that permanent can't attack or block. And if it has activated abilities, they cannot be activated. Another sort of removal aura we have is Weight of the Underworld. It's not incredibly strong, but when you've got stuff like Blightcaster and Auramancer and Blessed Spirits, it becomes even better. I think it's a fringe playable outside of this archetype, so it's one you can get later. It's 4 mana aura that gives -3/-2 to a creature. Now if you have Blightcaster in play, the creature's probably dead, and you can even 2 for 1 things. You can play the Weight of the Underworld and kill one creature with 2 toughness, and Blightcaster to kill another creature with 2 toughness, while also making, say, your Blessed Spirits bigger. And you can get it back with your Auramancer, and you can search for it with your Totem Guide Heartbeast. Next, we have Shadows of the Past, which we've already seen. It's a serviceable enchantment in this deck. It's not as good as it is in the other archetype we discussed that should run it. Because this deck isn't going to get 4 creatures in its graveyard nearly as easily, but the Scry 1 effect's okay. I'd say it's only a fringe playable in this deck. It can help you win in the later games still with the draining ability, but it's only a fringe playable, and only if you have like multiple Blightcasters and multiple Blessed Spirits probably. It's just not that exciting in this archetype, but it is a fringe playable. I could see playing it sometimes. Consecrated by Blood is another pretty solid aura. It also sort of can get around 2-for-1s. It's probably the weaker one of the offensive auras we've looked at here, but it's 4 mana to give +2/+2 and flying to a creature, and it has sack 2 other creatures, regenerate this creature. It can be a huge finisher, when you slap this card on one of your creatures, and the creature just, becomes a big flying finisher in the air. Chances are it had at least 2 power, and you can swing in the air, and then even if your opponent tries to kill it, you can sacrifice your other creatures to keep it alive, and then still swing with it again the next turn and do even more damage. I don't think it's amazing. I actually think it's better in the red-black archetype that kind of exists that we'll talk about later, but I think it's good here too. There are also some rares with enchantment synergy. One of these is Helm of the Gods. It's like the cranial plating of enchantments, which is cool. It'll be fun in other formats than limited. But if you're in this archetype already, Helm of the Gods is definitely something you should pick up in Pack 2, Pack 3. I wouldn't first pick it in Pack 1 or 2 because you don't know how things are going to shake out. But if you've already got 5 or 6 enchantments after Pack 1, pick up Helm of the Gods in Pack 2 or 3. It'll just make one of your creatures an even bigger threat. We also have Sigil of the Empty Throne, which is a reprint. It's an incredibly powerful one, too, I think. It has whenever you cast an enchantment spell, put a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying onto the battlefield. This is a card that I think is so good that if I saw it early and there wasn't premium removal in the pack or one of the very good uncommons in the set, I would pick up Sigil of the Empty Throne and just move into the archetype because Sigil of the Empty Throne is that good. You really only have to get 1 trigger off of it for it to break even, and then when it triggers multiple more times, it just becomes ridiculous. You do need to have probably like a crazy number of enchantments in your deck, like 10, but we saw that black and white have enchantment removal spells, so that can fill a removal spell slot, while also activating your Sigils of the Empty Throne and your Blightcasters and all these things. So I think this card is just so powerful and will just win you the game if you can get it in play if you have a strong deck in this archetype. And then we have a Mythic, Starfield of Nyx, which is a very good card for this archetype, but not as good as Sigil of the Empty Throne, I don't think. It has the old Opalescence ability. It's 5 mana. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can return target enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And as long as you control 5 or more enchantments, each non-aura enchantment you control is a creature, in addition to its other types, and has base power and toughness equal to its converted mana cost. So this can be a huge finisher. Sorry about that. It can be a huge finisher if you drop it late, and your Sigil of the Empty Throne suddenly has legs. But the downside to it is your opponent can now remove Sigil of the Empty Throne with removal spells. They can now remove any of your other enchantments with creature removal spells. The part of it that's best is kind of the returning an enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield every turn, I think. The Opalescence effect opens you up to some scary board removal. So this is another archetype that I think will come together really well sometimes, but will be flat at other times. Getting one of the rares here goes a long way to taking the deck to the next level, especially Sigil of the Empty Throne. The big problem here is that despite enchantments being the archetype, there are only a handful of commons and uncommons that benefit from enchantments. We saw the 4 of them. The Auramancer, the Blightcaster, the not Nightly Valor, what else do we see? Auramancer, Blightcaster, Blessed Spirits, and there's one more that's slipping my mind right now, but the point is there's only 4 of them. There's not a lot of cards that really benefit from enchantments. But if you get these rares, it takes a deck up another level. And black-white, I think, is the best archetype for enchantments in general because of Black Blightcaster and because of things like Sigil of the Empty Throne. Something to keep in mind if you end up managing to make this happen is there is enchantment hate. We have our friend Costed Caterpillar again, and our friend Conclave Naturalists again, which we talked about earlier. And there's also Enlightened Ascetic, who people are going to side in against you as well. All right, so now this archetype, I think, is another middling one. I think that so far the Elves and the Artifacts are the best. The other two can happen sometimes, but they're not always going to happen for you. Next up, we have Black-Red, whose archetype is Sacrificing, as Blazing Hellhound shows us. He's a very good gold card. I may argue that he's the best of the best of the two-color gold cards in this cycle. 4 for a 4/3 with Sacrifice another creature, and he does 1 damage to target creature or player. So he has a really great ability that allows him to, he can do this in response to removal. Of course, if they target the Hellhound, he can't sack himself, unfortunately. But you can do it in response to removal. You can do it just to finish your opponent, and some damage that they have to keep in mind at all times. Plus, he has a good body for 4. And so there are a number of playable uncommons, commons and uncommons that have sacrifice effects, one of which is Nantuko Husk. He's very good in this archetype, 3 mana 2/2. He'll be taken by a lot of decks in black, though, just because he's a solid card in general. And he can sack a creature to get +2/+2 until end of turn. Then we have Fleshbag Marauder, who when it enters the battlefield, each player has to sack a creature. We've seen him recently, basically, in Merciless Executioner. Then we have Fiery Conclusion, which I think is very good. It's a removal spell that is an instant, so you can actually do it in response to removal, too. But you can sack a creature to do 5 damage to target creature. And then we have Consecrated by Blood, which we saw a moment ago, which allows you to sack creatures to regenerate the pumped creature and gives it flying and +2/+2. Now, for this archetype to be really strong, what Wizards needed to do, to be supported anyway, not even strong, is they needed to print a number of creatures that wanted to be sacrificed. They needed to do something like we saw with the Silumgar blue-black deck in the Dragons of Tarkir draft, where there's all these value creatures that can be sacked in black and blue, and that makes the archetype really roll. Unfortunately, Wizards really didn't do that. I think this is basically the weakest of all archetypes. I think people almost never actually go into this archetype because there's so little support for it. But we are going to talk. I think it'll be better basically to just go black-red aggro with good removal to back it up. And things like Fiery Conclusion and Fleshbag Marauder and Nantuko Husk might be in it, but it's not really going to focus on sacrifice effects. There's just not enough to support these cards. Plus, 4 of the cards that have sac effects, including our Blazing Hellhound, are uncommon, so it's even harder to get a hold of them. But there are a few creatures that you want to sacrifice at common and uncommon. One of them is Deadbridge Shaman, who we talked about with the Elves. Sacking it is value because your opponent has to discard a card. We also have Dragon Fodder, which if you get a bunch of them, this archetype becomes a little more possible, but not incredibly possible. You pay 2 and you put 2/1 red goblin creature tokens on the battlefield. It's a card that's been in every limited format for the last year, I feel like. And it's fine. It's a good card anyway, and it can help give you more things to sacrifice. But I think where this deck will have the most success, if it ever actually comes together, is when you have Active Treason and Enthralling Victor. And these are effects that steal your opponent's creatures, and then you can sacrifice them to the sack outlets like Nantuko Husk we saw earlier. So you can Active Treason your opponent's creature, swing with your Husk and their creature, and then sack the creature at the end of the turn or whatever order. And Enthralling Victor is 4 mana for a 3/2. By the way, Active Treason is another card that's been in like every format for the last year. But Enthralling Victor is a new card that's 4 mana for a 3/2. When enters the battlefield, he steals a creature with power 2 or less, enabling you to sacrifice things once again. So I don't think this will really be an archetype. I think it'll be like a sub-theme in black-red decks that people make. Once you have like 2 or 3 Nantuko Husks in your deck, you're going to be like, well, shoot, I'm going to take Active Treason, of course, because it becomes a removal spell if you have enough sack outlets for it. Or, you could steal their creature, play Fleshbag Marauder, sack their guy on your side and force them to sacrifice whatever they have left. So it is a little sub-theme, but it's not even really a full-fledged mechanic. It's the least developed of all these mechanics, which is really disappointing, I think. I don't really know why they didn't give like equal love to each of the archetypes, but that's just what they decided to do. Another card to mention that's good in this archetype is Shadows of the Past. Whenever a creature dies, scry 1. Going to be all the time if you're doing sacrifice effects. And you're going to get creatures in your graveyard pretty quickly and be able to use the drain effect too, because you'll be sacrificing your creatures. Although you'll also be sacking your opponent's creatures ideally, so that won't help as much, but you'll still scry every time. So I think it's good here. There are rares with sacrifice synergies. Despoiler of Souls, for example, it's not exactly a sacrifice synergy, but when there are a number of creatures in your graveyard, he gives you the ability to get your Despoiler of Souls back. We also have our friend Graveblade Marauder back. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, we just saw him, the 1/4 Death Touch. That player loses life equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So that's pretty nice. You'll be sacrificing a lot of creatures. A new rare we haven't seen yet that has a lot of synergy here that I think would be a lot of fun if you could ever pull it off is Flame Shadow Conjuring, which is 4 mana enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you can pay 1 red. And if you do, you put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of that creature. That token gains haste, exile at the beginning of the next end step. So you could play any creature, pay 1, make a copy of it, and just swing with it. And then either it hits your opponent or you're just swinging with it to see what happens. And then you can sacrifice it to one of the sack outlets we've discussed already. So I think Flame Shadow Conjuring will be really good if this archetype really ends up being a thing, which I kind of doubt, but Flame Shadow Conjuring just has a lot of synergy with the black-red decks in general. And then we have another Planeswalker who definitely has some synergy here. She's pretty easy to flip in general, though. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you exile her. She's a 3 mana 2/3 with lifelink. And when she does die, when that creature dies, she transforms, and she leaves you behind a 2/2 black zombie creature token, which is another, sacrifice fodder if you so choose. And then she flips, and she can return cards from your graveyard to the battlefield with her -X ability. So she has synergy on both sides. She's easy to flip in this deck. You can just play a creature. You can just play your Nantuko Husk and sack it to yourself, and your Liliana is flipped, and your opponent ends up in a lot of trouble if that's what happens. Another card that's just a good rare in general, but can be really fun in this deck is Priest of the Bloodright, because you can just sacrifice away the priest if your life gets too low, and still hold on to your 5/5 black demon creature token. So like I said, I think this is probably the weakest of all the archetypes, the least supported. There's just not a good way to do it. I think it'll be a sub-theme. I think if you've got a lot of Nantuko Husks or Fleshbag Marauders, things like Active Treason become better. A lot better. And you'll start picking those up to sort of put that together. But I don't think it's a very strong archetype at all. It's the least supported of all of them, and I think that's kind of sad that they didn't support it fully. Next, we have the green-white archetype, and our exemplar for that is a 3 mana 2/3 with Vigilance and Renown 2. Renown is a new mechanic here in Magic Origins. Whenever a creature with Renown deals damage to a player, if it isn't Renowned, you put 2+1/+1 counters on it, and it becomes Renowned. So it's a powerful effect. I think the Citadel Castellan will be a very good card, and I think it'll convince a lot of people to go green-white because it's probably one of the better common or uncommon 3-drops in the format. There are a few common and uncommons that care about Renown that you can see here. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of them, but the ones we do have are pretty strong. Valoran Wardens, who I think is one of the better green uncommons in the format, 3 for a 1/3 with Renown 2 itself. And whenever any creature becomes Renowned, you draw a card. So this thing can just turn into an engine. This card, if you pick it up early enough, should just make you want to build a Renown deck because you're just going to draw so many cards, and your guys are just going to be getting bigger. It's just going to be incredible. Then we have Patron of the Valiant, one of the better white uncommons, 5 for a 4/4 flyer, so it's already pretty good. Also, though, when it comes into the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it, and that means that all your creatures who have become Renowned get this effect. So your whole team gets pumped. And then we have Enshrouding Mist, which if you make a Renown deck, Enshrouding Mist is a lot like Feat of Resistance. It's not quite as good. Feat of Resistance was the one colorless and one white mana card from Khans of Tarkir that put a +1/+1 counter on your creature and gave it protection from the color of your choice. But this already, without Renown, is a pretty good card because of that effect. But if you have a Renowned creature, you can untap it and surprise block your opponent with, say, your Valoran Wardens, who are a 3/5 and now a 4/6, who can't be damaged. So I think that's a pretty good effect. And now, while this archetype isn't nearly as supported because these are the only cards that really care about Renown in the set. This archetype isn't that supported either in the same way the Sacrifice deck isn't. The Sacrifice deck isn't even really a deck. I think it's more of a sub-theme. But I think Renown is the main theme of the green-white deck. But the thing about that is it's just an aggro deck. It's not a Sacrifice deck with all these moving parts that the red-black deck has. It's just an aggro deck. So it'll work out for you a lot of the time. Even if you don't get these cards, you probably get Enshrouding Mist. It won't be too hard to pick up. But the other two you might not get, but you just have a fast green-white Renown deck where your dudes just get bigger every time they hit someone. And so we're going to look at the common and uncommon creatures with Renown. And you can see them here. Whoops. Kind of made a mistake here. I forgot to make these appear properly, but I'll go through them anyway. We have Consul's Lieutenant, who's 2 white mana for a 2/1 with first strike. And when it hits the opponent, it has Renown 1 as well. When it hits the opponent, it becomes Renown, becomes a 3/2. And then it has, if it's Renowned, when it swings, all creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn. So it's a very good card, one of the better white uncommons. Knight of the Pilgrim's Road is 3 mana for a 3/2 with Renown 1. Just a cheap, efficient, powerful creature. Farika's Disciple is 4 mana for a 2/3 Death Touch with Renown 1. So another creature that your opponent's not really going to want to block, similar to Consul's Lieutenant, has first strike. They could trade for it if they want. But if it hits them, it gets Renown, becomes a 3/4. Rock Maulers, which is a very good green common, I think. And I may have overlooked it in my other videos the more I look at Rock Maulers. But it's a 5 mana 4/4 with Trample and Renown 2. So the Trample really enables it to get through for damage. We have Stalwart Aven, another one of the better white commons. 3 mana for 1/3 flyer with Renown 1. Topan Freeblade, 2 mana for a 2/2 with Vigilance and Renown 1. And War Oracle, which is a 4 mana 3/3 with Lifelink and Renown 1. So you have a lot of these really good Renown creatures, a common and uncommon. So you're just sort of building an aggro deck that happens to have a lot of Renown creatures in it, where you're going to be really happy to pick up the cards, the Patron of the Valiant, and the Valoran Wardens, and things like that to support the deck. So you'll want to pick those up later, probably, after you're sure you have enough Renown to support it. So this archetype is basically, as I said, just an aggro deck that happens to have some Renown synergies. I think it's a pretty strong archetype just because it's a fast, aggressive archetype where the creatures get more difficult to deal with. And there's also some rares that support this archetype. Kythian's Irregulars, one of the better rares in the set, and Outland Colossus, one of the other better rares in the set. Both have Renown and are both very good cards. And we also have Relic Seeker, who is only good if you can pick up a few like Throwing Knives, or you have some of the rare equipment in the set that's actually pretty good. When it becomes Renowned, you get to search your library for an equipment card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. I mean, he's fine in a vacuum too, but not worth picking up super early unless you already have a couple equipment cards, because he's 2 for a 2/2 with Renown 1. So that's the green-white archetype. There's lots of Renown. You'll be able to build a deck probably with 60-70% of your creatures will have Renown if you're in this archetype, and then Valoran Wardens will become an incredibly strong card. But it's not an archetype that's sort of the archetype they suggest to you from their gold card. You can actually perform here, unlike the red-black archetype. So the red-green archetype is basically ramping into fatties and cards that care about lands in general. And that's exemplified here by Zendikar Incarnate, who is 4 mana, and his power is equal to the number of lands you control. So he's going to be a 4 mana 4/4 unless you ramp him out there on like turn 3. And he'll just get bigger as the game goes on. So he's a very good gold card. Nothing incredibly exciting, but a good card that will get stronger as the game goes on. And there's some commons and uncommons that care about ramp and lands in general in this set. One of them is Zendikar's Royal. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, you can, under your control, you get to put a 2/2 green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. I think it's pretty good, especially if you're in an archetype where you're trying to get as many lands in play as possible for various purposes. And it makes, the other nice thing about it is in the late game, if you start to get flooded or draw a bunch of lands, or even just a few lands, they all make creatures. So that's a pretty big effect. We also have Nissa's Pilgrimage, which allows you to search your library for 2 forests, reveal those cards and put them onto the battlefield, one onto the battlefield tapped rather, and the rest into your hand, and then you shuffle your library. So if Zendikar Royal in play, you also get a creature. And if there are 2 or more instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard, you search your library for 3 forests instead of 2 through the Spell Mastery effect. So that can be really big. And then we have Leaf Gilder, which is a 2-mana 2/1 who can add green. Unfortunately, even though Wizards says, Mark Rosewater said that this archetype is about ramping into big creatures, there's really only 2 common or uncommon ramp spells. Now, granted, they're both common, Nissa's Pilgrimage and Leaf Gilder, but they also only produce green. So there's no way to ramp a bunch of red mana if you need it for whatever reason. This is another archetype that I think is unfortunately kind of undersupported. I think if you pick up a few Nissa's Pilgrimages and a few Leaf Gliders, like 2 of each, you probably can build a ramp deck, but that's basically the only way you can do it. But there are some rares that ramp that can help you make this happen. One of them being Animist's Awakening. Interestingly, and probably not surprisingly, all 3 of these cards have to do with Nissa. So this is Nissa, the Animist's Awakening. X and a green, reveal the top X cards of your library, and you put all lands from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order, which the random order part's interesting. You don't see that very often. And then it has Spell Mastery, and if you have 2 or more instant sorceries in your graveyard, you can then untap all those lands. I think this is going to have some constructed implications, especially in Modern, but I think it's all right in Limited. It's not amazing, but I mean, if you can pay 5 and hit 2 or 3 lands, then you're ramping really fast. And that's not bad. I don't think it's incredible, though. I wouldn't take it early ever. What I would take early, however, is Nissa, Vastwood Seer. And that might be the one thing, like if I open that pack 1, pick 1, I'd be like, all right, let's build a ramp deck. Because she herself searches your library for a forest and puts it into your hand. And whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you can then, you can check to see if you have 7 or more under your control, and then you exile Nissa and return her to the battlefield transformed under her owner's control. And her other side also cares about lands. Her +1 reveals the top card of your library. If it's a land, you put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, you put it into your hand. So it's a draw card effect or a ramp effect. Her -2 isn't really related to this archetype, but it does give you a big 4/4 body. But the -7 allows you to untap 6 lands, make them into elemental creatures forever that are 6/6s, and there's still lands as well. So opening Nissa is pretty much the only way I'd try to make this archetype work. I think, like some of the other archetypes we've looked at, the red-green archetype isn't very supported, and you'll basically just end up building a red-green monsters deck, which is usually what the archetype for red-green is. Just lots of big creatures, and having a little ramp in the deck will be good, but you're not going to build the whole deck around ramp. This is another card that might make you think about ramping, though, because it's so good in Limited. It's a 2 mana for an equipment, Sword of the Animus, so we've got Nissa's Sword now. It's a legendary artifact. The equipped creature gets +1/+1, 2 to cast, 2 to equip. And whenever that creature attacks, you can search your library for any basic land card, put it on the battlefield tap, and shuffle your library. So that's a pretty huge effect. I mean, you can ramp really fast with this, in addition to the bonus your creature gets. It's also going to be really good in EDH Commander formats as well, I think. But it's a very good card that would also make ramping possible. There are a lot of creatures you can try to ramp into, and spells you can try to ramp into, one of which is Ravaging Blaze, X and double red. I think it's the best red uncommon, and maybe the best uncommon in the whole set. That's my impression right now. X and 2 red, deals X damage to a creature. Then if you have Spell Mastery, it deals X to the creature's controller. So if you can get a bunch of lands in play through ramp effects and Leaf Gilder's mana adding effect, you can do a lot of damage to your opponent and kill basically any creature. And then there's just a number of 5-drops in red and green, 5 drops or more, that would be nice to accelerate into on turn 4, for example. So we're going to talk about some of them. Like if you're trying to build a ramp deck, these are the monsters you want to ramp into. Like Conclave Naturalists, 5 for a 4/4. Typically, pretty regularly anyway, going to have a target for its destruction effect. Then we have Prickle Boar, who I think is a very good red common. who, for all intents and purposes, is 5 mana for a 5/3 first strike. Playing that on turn 4 is ridiculous. We have our old friend Rox Maulers, who's just a really efficient creature. 5 mana, 4/4 trample, Renown 2. Then we have Seismic Elemental, who's a 5 mana, 4/4, who also makes it so your opponent's creatures without flying can't block. So say you've already played a few creatures, then you drop a Seismic Elemental, you can just swing through with all these monsters. And then we have Sky Snare Spider, who I think is one of the better uncommon green cards in the set. 6 mana for 6/6 Vigilance and Reach. If you can ramp into that on turn 4 or 5, your opponent's going to be in a world of hurt probably. And there's also the less exciting Vastwood Gorger, who's just a 6 mana 5/6. But if you manage to build this ramp deck, it'll be pretty strong. We also have Volcanic Rambler, who's like doubly has synergy with the ramp deck because it's 6 mana for 6/4, which is a fine rate, and you can play it on turn 4 or 5 and if you have enough ramp. And then, you can dump you have a mana sink. You can dump all your lands into Volcanic Rambler's ability to ping the opponent. Another effect you'll have to accelerate into is Jiraga Invocation. Say you've got some of these monsters on the table already, Jiraga Invocation can just end the game for you right there. I think this is another card that's just good in the deck, but it's more reflective of the deck as a green-red monsters deck, and that's Elemental Bond. It's 3 mana. Whatever creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield, you draw a card. And this deck's going to have a lot of those. It's just going to try to get to, its 5 and 6 drops as fast as it can and dominate the game from there. So that's nice. There's also a few rares that you're going to want to ramp into. Gaia's Revenge is the biggest, of these to ramp into. A 7 mana 8/5 with haste, who can't be countered and can't be the target of non-green spells or abilities from non-green sources. So it's basically unable to be removed by a removal spell. There's not much that can deal with it. We also have Outland Colossus again, who dropping on turn 4 is even crazier than turn 5. There's also Chandra's Ignition, which is just good in this red-green monsters deck because it lets you can wipe the field pretty easily with Chandra's Ignition, even if you just have one guy on the table, because one of your creatures deals damage equal to its power to each other creature and each opponent, and you're going to have a lot of that. We also have Molten Vortex, which has a little bit of synergy. You're going to be wanting to run a lot of lands, but once you get to the number you need, you have a way to just start pinging your opponent. And there's also Woodland Bellower, of course, who's one of the better rares or mythics in the set. 6 mana for 6/5, snags you with 3-drop from your deck as well, as long as it's green. So that's sort of the red-green archetype. You can ramp if you want to, but I think most of the time the deck's just going to run a lot of lower-costed creatures in the early game that are efficient, and then try to get out big monsters in the late game to run over the opponent. 1 or 2 ramp cards might make the deck, but ramp certainly doesn't seem to be the archetype as Wizards wanted to indicate to us. But now we're on to red-white, which has kind of a number of things to it, but it's basically an aggro deck. It's an aggro deck, but it also has a bunch of pump spells and a bunch of ways to, individual pump spells and a bunch of ways to pump the whole team. These 2 colors have the access to the most efficiently costed creatures on the lower part of the curve in the whole format. So that means this is probably going to be the fastest deck in the whole format. And so I think it's going to be a pretty good archetype, even though it's not really there's not a real archetype to it other than it's just an aggro deck, which is usually what red-white is, I suppose. So we're going to talk about the common. Oh, I didn't actually talk about him. The exemplar of the red-white archetype is the 3 mana 2/2 double strike. So an incredibly efficient card who desperately wants to be pumped. So that sort of indicates what our archetype is here. I'm just going to talk about the huge number of common and uncommon creatures red and white have that are incredibly aggressive and efficiently costed. You have Blessed Spirits, who we've seen before, a 3 mana 2/2 with flyer, whenever you cast an enchantment spell, it gets bigger. Then we have Crowan Sergeant, who's a very efficient creature, 3 mana for 2/2 first strike. Then he has Renown 1, so if he can get through your opponent, he just gets bigger and harder to deal with. Acolyte of the Inferno, who I think is probably the second best uncommon, behind Searing Blaze. It's a 3 mana 3/1 with Renown 1. You're like, yeah, whatever. But whenever it attacks and it becomes blocked, it deals 2 damage to the creature that blocks it. So any creature with 2 or less toughness just can't block this without dying. And that's a big problem. And even if they do block it, you can trade up. I mean, this thing can take down creatures with 5 toughness. So he's a very good uncommon creature. One of the better aggressively costed creatures we have in this archetype, in this red-white deck. He's going to be a very good card that you're going to want all the time if you're in red. And in this archetype, he's even better because this archetype's just going to curve out and run over your opponent pretty often if they can't do something about it. Then we have Consul's Lieutenant, who kind of also, he's a creature, but he also has the pump the whole team effect because he's 2 for 2/1 first strike with Renown 1. When it attacks, if it's renowned, other attacking creatures you control get pumped. So he's another, 2 mana, 2 power plus first strike. It's a very good deal. Knight of the Pilgrim's Road again, a 3 mana 3/2 with Renown 1. It's another, efficient creature. Fire Fiend Elemental, I think, is a really good red common. 4 mana for a 3/2 with haste and Renown 1. So he can just, surprise the opponent, get out there and become a 4/3 with his haste. Stalwart Haven again, a 3 mana 1/3 with flying and Renown 1. Skyraker Giant, who is basically a Summit Prowler with reach. And Summit Prowler was plenty good in the last archetype, so I can only imagine that Skyraker Giant's going to be good as well. And then we have Boggart Brute, who's 3 mana for 3/2, another good rate. Plus he has Menace. And then we have Patron of the Valiant, a 5 mana 4/4 flyer. He's not going to be at his best in this archetype. You're going to get a little renown, but green-white's where you're going to get like the most renown. There's a little renown here, even on red cards, but green and white cards, I think, have the most renown of anything. That being said, we also have Topon Freeblade, who I don't know if I actually put on the other list, but he's yet another white creature with renown. 2 mana 2/2 with Vigilance, already pretty solid, and then he has Renown 1. So this is, you can see all of these commons and uncommons that these 2 colors have are just really efficiently costed cards who, are above rate, basically, for what they cost, and you can really run over your opponent quickly if you get these things out there. There's also a bunch of common and uncommon pump spells in red and white, and 1 artifact, as you can see, that go well in this archetype, especially with the dude with double strike. One of them is Titan's Strength, which is just a good combat trick in general. Helps you run over a creature if your opponent decides to block, while also allowing you to scry 1. You also have Throwing Knife, which we've seen before, which is just a good pump spell that allows you to also act as a removal spell. The reason these pumps are important is because if you can't run your opponent over in the early game, you've got to find a way to get through their big creatures in the late game, because you just don't have access to that many big creatures at common and uncommon. But Throwing Knife and Titan Strength and also Mighty Leap and Infectious Bloodlust and Grasp with the Heromancer are all cards that allow you to get through your opponent's defenses. Mighty Leap we just saw in Modern Masters. It's 1 and a white for +2/+2 and flying. It's also an instant combat trick. Infectious Bloodlust is yet another playable aura in this format. I think it's playable because, like all good auras, the auras that are good, it can replace itself. It's definitely a card that gets better in multiples. It's 2 mana for +2/+1, and it gives the creature haste, but it also gives it like the Berserker ability. It has to attack each turn if able. But when that creature dies, you can search your library for a card named Infectious Bloodlust, reveal it, and put it into your hand. I wouldn't recommend running more than 2, but the fact it can replace itself the first time makes it all right. And then we have Grasp of the Heromancer again, who we talked about in the white-black archetype, which is just a decent aura that can tap opponents' creatures down and help you get through for more damage. There also are a number of effects in white and red that allow you to go wide on your opponent. Some of these are the big go wide effects. Valor and Akros, I think, is going to be really good in this archetype. We just talked about how you're just going to be throwing creatures out there every single turn. And with Valor and Akros, every time you play a creature, your whole team gets a Glorious Anthem for a turn. Amperin Tacticians, 4 mana for a 3/3 that anthems your whole team for a turn. Dragon Fodder helps you go wide by just making more small creatures. Plus, Dragon Fodder plus Valor and Akros is a pretty sick combo. If you get the Valor and Akros out there, and then Dragon Fodder, you suddenly, all your creatures get +2/+2 until end of turn. And there's also, in the same vein, we talked about all the red cards and artifacts who make Thopter tokens when they come into play. Those are equally ridiculous with Valor and Akros because you can play them, get 2 creatures in play, and pump your whole team +2/+2. Lets you go wider, so your Amprint Tacticians and other Anthem effects help you get through to finish your opponent after they seem to have stabilized. Kithian's Tactics is another one of these effects. It's pretty good. I don't think it's as good actually as Amprint Tactician or Valor and Akros, but it gives all your creatures +2/+1 until end of turn for 1 and double white, and its Spell Mastery effect can give all your creatures Vigilance, so that can be big too. I mean, if you can get to Spell Mastery, which if you're running a few Dragon Fodders, and some removal spells, which white and red do have some good removal spells, it'll be pretty easy to get. So giving your whole team Vigilance when you swing is another way to sort of protect yourself in the late game after your opponent gets their big guys out there. There are also a number of really good aggro rares and mythics. We've got Abbot of Corral Keep, another dude with prowess, 2 for a 2/1 with prowess. And when it enters the battlefield, you get to exile the top card of your library, and you can play that card. Your curve's going to be low in this deck, so you can play this guy relatively early and still be like, sweet, I can play this creature I just drew, and things like that. So it's a pretty good effect. We also have Archangel of Tithes. Going to be harder to cast because of the triple white, but I think it's a crazy good rare in this format, especially when you're in this archetype. It's good in any white deck, but in this archetype, it's good because it makes it so anytime your Archangel attacks, your opponent has to pay 1 for every card they want to block with. So they're going to have to slow down their game and just try to defend themselves against your onslaught. It also, in the late game, keeps your opponent from attacking you as long as the Archangel's untapped unless they pay 1 each time. We also have Avaricious Dragon, who's going to be pretty good in this archetype. You're going to have dumped your whole hand pretty quickly with this archetype because you're just going to play a bunch of creatures and some early removal to get through for the damage you need to get through for. And this dragon, who's a mythic, so it's going to be hard to see, is going to be really good in this archetype because you're not going to care too much about discarding your whole hand. You're going to care about drawing more gas, more creatures to pump your whole team with Valor and Akros, or just to get more guys on the field to try to get through for lethal. Then we have the appearance of another Planeswalker flip guy. This one's Kithian, Hero of Akros, who's just a really good 1-drop on his own. 1 mana for 2/1. For 3 mana, he can make himself indestructible. And then when he and at least 2 other creatures attack, he flips, which will be easy in this archetype. He's most suited to this archetype, which I suppose makes sense because the Akroans were a red-white people. And he flips into Gideon Battleforged, who also is good for this archetype. He can force creatures into attacking with his +2 ability, so your opponent can't have blockers. He can also give your guys indestructible until the next turn, and he can just turn himself into a big indestructible body. So Kithian's going to be really great. He's first pickable in general, so he's not going to be easy to get like late. But if you open him in one of your packs and you're in this red-white archetype, I'd say you're going to do pretty well. Kithian's Irregulars are also very good in this archetype. They're good in general. It's a first pick card every time you see it, I think. So if you get that, it's another card you'll be really happy to have. The 4 mana 4/3 with Renown 1, and for double white can tap stuff down. And then we have Scab Clan Berserker, who's a 3 mana 2/2 with haste, another haster with Renown. We have one at common too. So when it hits an opponent, it becomes a 3/3, which will be pretty easy to make happen since you can haste it in on turn 3. And then on top of that, whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, Scabland Berserker, if it's Renowned, does 2 damage to that player. And your opponent's going to be playing things like that. Maybe they just play a spell to remove your Scabland Berserker, but you've still gotten value out of it because they took 2, and also 3 because the thing has Renown. So those are all the good rares for this archetype. I think it's a lot like the green-white archetype. It's kind of just along the typical lines of those decks. They're just aggro decks. The green-white deck has a little higher of a curve and tries to go big late and run over the opponent. And this deck tries to get under, every other deck and just bum rush the opponent until they're dead. This will be the fastest deck in the archetype, and it'll be one of the more consistently good archetypes because it's not, like the sacrifice archetype, which isn't that widely supported. These aggro archetypes are just supported by good creatures being printed, so it's pretty easy to make it happen. So that is the red-white archetype, which I think will be one of the better ones. Next, we have the blue-white archetype, which is I'm calling Skies Control. The blue-white Skies deck is a deck a lot of the time in limited formats. You know, those two colors typically have the most efficiently costed flyers, and that is exactly the case here as well. But blue and white also have access to some of the best tempo disruption cards for your opponent, and to some of the best removal spells. So it's kind of a control deck. Basically, the strategy I see coming from this deck is to basically play, a control game early, play out a few, early chump blockers, smaller creatures, and then once you've gained control of the game, you've stopped your opponent's plan on the ground, start swinging away with flyers in the sky. And Thunderclap Wyvern, I think, is really cool flavor-wise because it sort of exemplifies this format for this archetype for blue-white in a better way than some of the others do. It's a 4-mana 2/3 flyer, but it has flash, so you can flash it in as a surprise blocker to kill a 2/2, for example. You can also leave mana up so you can use one of your counter spells or removal spells, and it gives all your other flyers +1/+1. Like, this is the most clearly in a while they've said, build the blue-white flyers deck, and that's what's going to happen here, and I think it'll be a lot of fun. It's probably the archetype I'm looking the most forward to. I just, I like this sort of strategy, and I'm looking forward to it a lot. And there's a number of playable common and uncommon flyers in these colors. As I said, they have the access to the most of them, and that's what enables this archetype to be strong. They have Blessed Spirits, which is definitely stronger in other archetypes, but it's in the archetypes that care about enchantments, the black-white ones specifically. But Blessed Spirits is a 3-mana 2/2 flyer, and blue and white both have two important removal spells at enchantment: Suppression Bonds and Narcolepsy, which we'll see momentarily in the control part of this list I'm looking at. So Blessed Spirits will get big in this deck too. They've also got two of the creatures that generate Thopter tokens, which are flyers, and Aspiring Aeronaut itself flies, so it's 4 mana for a 1/2 flyer and a 1/1 Thopter token. Then we have Charging Griffin, which isn't super exciting, certainly, but it's a 4 mana 2/2, and then when it swings, it becomes a 3/3. So if you can look at it as a 4 mana 3/3, it's pretty good. The bad news is it can die to things like Weight of the Underworld and the 1 red mana do 2 damage to target creature instant. But I mean, if you have a couple Thunderclap Wyverns, then you should be running as many flyers as you can. Then we have Patron of the Valiant, who again isn't going to be highly sought after in this deck, as highly sought after as the green-white aggro deck is going to want it, but it's good. It's a 5-mana 4/4, and you actually, if you have Blessed Spirits, there's actually a little bit of a combo there. And then we have Ring Warden Owl, who's just this card embodies sort of this, I have lots of instant spells, and I'm going to kill you in the air strategy too, because it has Prowess, and it's a 5-mana 3/3 with flying with Prowess, so it's a very efficient card. It's going to be a big finisher in a deck like this. Scrap Skin Drake is 3 mana for a 2/3 flyer. It's basically Cloud Elemental, but it's a zombie Drake instead of an elemental. Can't block creatures without flying, so that's a little bit of a setback, but it's still a lot of damage in the air. Then we have Stalwart Aven, 3 mana for a 1/3 with flying and Renown 1, which we've seen on lots of lists just because it's really good. And there's also Stratus Walk, so you don't even necessarily have to, you're going to want more flyers than anything in this deck, because that's how it's going to win, is in the air after it's locked down your opponent's creatures on the ground, or gets ahead in the air, ahead of the creatures on the ground. But Stratus Walk can give anything flying, so if you have a very good blue or white creature, Scab Goliath, for example, put Stratus Walk on that and you have a 6/9 flyer, so that's pretty frightening. And it's a good aura because it replaces itself. It draws you a card. There's also different card, Tower Geist, which embodies this deck pretty well too. It's a 4 mana 2/2 flyer, so it benefits from having flying, which the Thunderclap Wyvern likes. And when it enters the battlefield, you get to draw a card. You look at the top 2 cards of your library, put 1 in your hand and 1 into your graveyard, so it gives you more gas, gets you to your control spells sooner. And then there's also Whirler Rogue, who we saw earlier. 4 mana 2/2, who can make 2 Thopter tokens and then can tap those tokens to make things unblockable. And there's some very good playable rare flyers. We have Alhamnarit, High Arbiter, who for 7 mana is a 5/5 flyer. And when he comes into play, you get to look at your opponent's hand, and you choose a card, and they can't play that card. So, when he comes into play, name removal, the one removal spell they have in their hand, and the game's quickly going to get out of control for them. So he's pretty good. Not as good as Archangel of Tithes or Soulblade Djinn. We've seen the Archangel a minute ago. Just 4 mana, 3/5 flyers are already good, but it also makes your opponent have to invest mana into attacking and blocking. And then we have Soulblade Djinn, who gives basically prowess to your whole team every time you cast a non-creature spell, which will be pretty frequently in this deck, as we're going to see in a moment. So the Soulblade Djinn is very good. I think both Archangel of Tithes and Soulblade Djinn are first pickable. If you end up with both of them in your deck, you're just really happy, especially if you can get your hands on a Thunderclap Wyvern. I think like all these gold cards, a Thunderclap Wyvern won't be picked really highly, and if it's around late, that means that the archetype is relatively open, and I would try to go for it as long as I was already in one of the colors. But I think this is going to be, I feel like this is going to be my favorite archetype, so I'm hoping I can make it happen, and I hope you can too. There's also a lot of common and uncommon tempo and control that can help get you to the late game or get you your win through swinging in the air with smaller flyers. One of these is Anchor to the Aether. It's not amazing, mostly because it's a sorcery, but it can still set your opponent back. There are also a number of playable auras in the set, and some creature tokens in the set that it can just, disintegrate, and you get to scry 1 in the process. There's also Bone to Ash, which isn't incredible. I would probably never want more than 1, and I may even then only sideboard it in against certain opponents, but it allows you to keep mana up, and, you can, your Thunderclap Wyvern, for example, has Flash, but you also have lots of other instances we're going to see in a second that your opponent has to worry about, and allows you to keep mana up and counter a spell, and then it replaces itself by drawing you a card. Calculated Dismissal. Of all of these, I think Calculated Dismissal is the best counterspell. Of all the counterspells in this set, it's 3 mana for a mana leak, basically, but it has Spell Mastery that will allow you to scry 2, which is nice. That's going to be a big one for stopping your opponent from playing big spells in the late game or keep them off tempo in the early game. And then there's just good white removal too, like Celestial Flare. I think is a really good common. I still think it's the best, or one of the best white commons. It makes your opponent sacrifice an attacking or blocking creature at instant speed. And remember, we've got prowess on our creatures too, so it's something to keep in mind. Clash of Wills is all right. I don't think, again, it's as good as Calculated Dismissal. Do think it's better than Bone to Ash because, even in the late game it can do something, and so can Bone to Ash, but Calculated Dismissal is just such a big play earlier. But if you draw a Clash of Wills late and you're like tied on board or head on board, then it can be pretty great. I would never run more than 1 though. And then there's Claustrophobia, which I think is one of the better removal spells in the whole set. 1 in double blue. When it enters the battlefield, tap Enchanted Creature. Enchanted Creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. Then there's Disperse, which is a solid bounce spell. Just return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. And then there's Send to Sleep, which is 1 in a blue, and it can tap down both your opponent's creatures. And if you have Spell Mastery, which if you're looking at this list of cards, all these instants will be easiest to obtain in the blue-white deck of all decks. So Spell Mastery is kind of a sub-theme here. Send to Sleep will, tap down both creatures until they don't untap during the controller's next untap step. It basically, freezes 2 creatures. Then there's Separatist Void Mage. When it enters the battlefield, it bounces a creature. It's similar to Aven Surveyor, who we just saw, but doesn't have flying, but he does cost 1 mana less. And then there's Swift Reckoning, another very good removal spell in white. That destroys tapped creatures, and then if you have Spell Mastery, you can play it as an instant. And then there's Suppression Bonds, which is another very good removal spell. That's an aura that you can stick on your opponent's creatures, and they can't attack or block, and their activated abilities can't be activated. You can also put it on problem enchantments if you're desperate, or artifacts, and keep their activated abilities from being activated. So white and blue have a huge number of removal spells, if you want to count the counter spells and bounce spells as such too. But even if you don't, there's a number of ways to slow your opponent down, make their creatures useless to them, and then you just swing away in the air for the win. And there's some rare tempo and control. One of the best is Tragic Arrogance, which I think is one of the best rares in the whole set. I think I had it number 2 on my list. 5 mana, and you get to choose 1 type of each permanent each player has, except lands, and then all others are destroyed. So if you're starting to get behind on board in the early game, you can use this Tragic Arrogance to help you get to the late game and win it through flyers. You can also use it late game if your opponent has managed to stabilize against your flyers to kill all of their creatures except, a 2/2 elf they still have on the field or something like that, and get through for the win. There's also Harbinger of the Tides, which is a card, if you're into money drafting, that I think is going to be worth a lot of money because it'll make it into Merfolk decks because it's so good. But it's 2 mana for a 2/2. You'll almost never play it that way in Limited because if you wait a little longer, you can pay 2 extra mana and return tapped creatures to their owner's hand at instant speed. It still returns a tapped creature if you play it at sorcery speed, and sometimes that will be the move because it's a huge tempo swing. But I think it's better to keep it up as a trick than anything. It's also Mizium Meddler, who also has Flash. Got some Flash sub-theme too, I guess, in this blue-white. And it's 3 mana for a 1/4. And when there's the battlefield, it can redirect a spell or ability to itself. Now, it can do this to help save one of your important flyers that are helping you win the game. But the other fun thing about it, against decks that are running auras, is you can play the Meddler and then he gets the aura. Or your opponent can play a pump spell, a combat trick, and you can play the Meddler, and the Meddler gets pumped by the combat trick. So it's a very good card for this archetype. And then there's Displacement Wave, which is like the blue sort of mass removal spell, but blue has 2 basically in Displacement Wave and Tragic Arrogance. Black has 1, but no other color has any. So blue-white has a chance at 2 of them. Displacement Wave is also symmetrical though, and it returns all land permanents with converted mana cost X or less to their owner's hands. And that's actually a pretty big effect, especially early. Like even if you want to play this early to try to buy yourself more time, like on turn 4, you can put 4 mana into it and it's going to bounce most of the creatures. Late game, you're going to have the bigger, more expensive creatures most likely in the air, depending on what archetype you are playing against. And you can Displacement Wave for 4, let's say. Your guys stay on the field and they lose everything. So that's a pretty incredible effect. Then there's also Disciple of the Ring, who we've talked about before. It's good in the graveyard deck, but it's good in this deck too, just because this deck's going to be chock full of instants and sorceries. You can pay 1 and exile an instant or sorcery to counter a non-creature spell unless they pay 2. Pump your Disciple of the Ring, tap a creature, untap a creature. So that's a very good mythic for this archetype. And I think this, as I've been alluding to, I think this is one of the strongest archetypes. I think it's the only true control deck in the format. Blue-black can probably be a control deck at times, but this one will be more often. It's enabled by a huge number of commons and uncommon removal spells and tempo spells. This deck probably will only need to run 9 or 10 creatures because it has access to so much removal, and it can pack itself full of removal spells and counter spells and look to win in the air. And Thunderclap Wyvern is just icing on the cake at that point. All right, so we're here and down to the last archetype, and that last archetype is blue-green, and it is a little bit of a control archetype as well. It also has access to a lot of tempo cards, and that's aggro. It's an aggro control archetype, and I think that is well exemplified by Bounding Crassus. By aggro control, I mean this deck plays efficient creatures when it can that have abilities that help put your opponent behind on tempo, or abilities that help make the creature better as the game go on, or abilities that help you draw cards and things like that. You play creatures, but they all have sort of controlling effects, and Bounding Crassus is an example. When it enters the battlefield, like with Bounding Crassus is very good. When it enters the battlefield, that's Flash, you can tap or untap target creature. So with Bounding Crassus early game, you can 2-for-1 your opponent a lot of the time, I feel like. Like if you play him on turn 4, and your opponent's attacking with like 2/2/2s or something like that, and you've just attacked them with a 2/3, you can play your Crassus, untap your 2/3, and just block both of them and get way ahead. The Crassus can also just be used at the beginning of combat to block down a problem creature, or at the ending of your opponent's turn to get rid of a blocker. So it's a very flexible card, and it's a 3-mana 3/3, which is a very good rate. It's the kind of body, the ideal body at 3/3. So first I'm going to talk about the common and uncommon tempo and card advantage cards. We've just seen some of them. Anchor to the Aether is here again. It's a bounce spell. Bone to Ash we have here again. the counter spell, draw a card. Calculated dismissal we have again. So you can see that the blue-green archetype and the white blue archetype are going to be fighting over cards a lot. But I think that the white-blue archetype needs all these things even more than the blue-green archetype does, except maybe claustrophobia. I think I called it narcolepsy earlier, but I meant claustrophobia. Yeah, we've just seen that removal spell as well. We've also got Disperse here again. But then we got stuff like Elvish Visionary, which is, very up the alley of this deck. It's 1 and a green for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. So ideally, this thing can also trade, so you get an extra card out of it. Worst case scenario, it's a chump blocker late, and it draws you an extra card. And you're going to want to get ahead in card advantage with this deck. There's also Gather the Pack for 1 and a green. You reveal the top 5 cards of your library, and you may put a creature card from among them into your hand, and you put the rest into your graveyard. Now, this isn't a huge graveyard, what is the word I'm looking for? A huge graveyard archetype, but there is a lot of spell mastery in this archetype. This card has it too. It allows you to get 2 creature cards out of the top 5 if you have spell mastery, and this can help you activate spell mastery as well. Then there's Llanowar Empath. 4 for a 2/2, which is nothing exciting. And it enters the battlefield at scries 2, though, and you reveal the top card of your library, and if it's a creature card, you get to put it into your hand. And that's exactly, the kind of thing this deck wants. You get a free card in your hand, and you get a body on the field in the same turn. You're affecting your hand and the table at the same time, which is good, and that's what this sort of aggro control approach wants to do. We also have Jesse and Thief. Which we haven't seen yet. It can really fit into any blue deck, but I think it's at its best here. I think all the prowess creatures are at its best either in this deck or the blue-white deck. Although there's one prowess creature that's red, I guess, but you know what I mean. And it's 3 mana for a 1/3. It's basically, the old Thieving Magpie, 4 mana for a 1/3 flyer that draws you a card. But this has prowess. It's hard for your opponent to block if you play it. You're swinging with it, and they have creatures with 2 toughness. They just don't know what you might have. This deck's also going to want combat tricks. I'm thinking there's some good green combat tricks like Titanic Growth that'll help enable prowess and things like that to an even greater degree. There's Separatist Void Mage, who we just saw, who bounces a creature, puts a body on the table, so gets you ahead on tempo. There's Tower Geist, who we just saw, he's better than Llanowar Empath, I think, but they're similar, of course. But Tower Geist can fly, and it gets you a card no matter what. So it doesn't let you scry, though, so maybe it evens out. Send to Sleep, who we've just seen, which taps 2 target creatures, and if there are 2 or more instant sorceries in your graveyard, you get to freeze the creatures down. But the big difference here is the way that the deck wins. The blue-white deck wins with flyers in the air, and this deck mostly tries to win. I mean, it can. Ringwarden Owl is good in this deck, too, but this deck also can win with big green guys on the ground. And at common uncommon, this is sort of what we have going on. We've got Ringwarden Owl as sort of the big flying win condition. But we have these 4 common uncommon finishers that are really good. Vastwood Gorger, well, he's not really good. He's 6 mana for a 5/6, but he's fine. Sky Snare Spider, Scab Goliath, and Rock Maulers are all very good. 6 mana, 6/6, Vigilance and Reach for Sky Snare, 6 mana, 6/9 for the Scab, and he can be set up more more in the black blue deck, but this deck also, it's going to be playing a lot of creatures early too that are chumping, like Elvish Visionary, so the Scab Goliath will have things to exile when it comes into play, and Rock Maulers. And then to the right, I also have Stratus Walk and Whirler Rogue as, sort of helpers for them. The Stratus Walk can give any of these guys flying, while also drawing you a card, and Whirler Rogue can make any of these guys unblockable the turn it comes into play. So those are the various ways you can win with this deck at common and uncommon. You're going to be more aggressive in the early game than the blue-white deck is, but you're going to have some controlling elements because you're going to have really good blue removal. There's also 1 green removal spell that's all right that I didn't mention. The 4 mana, target creature you control gets +2/+2 and fights another target creature you don't control. And I didn't mention it because it's not as good as any of the blue stuff, basically. So this deck tries to win, in the late game. It can win in the air, but it wins on the ground more often than it does in the air with its big green creatures that it can then put Stratus Walk or Whirler Rogue on to be even more disgusting. And there's some rare win conditions and tempo cards for this. I think Mana Gorge or Hydra, I wish they'd printed more cards like this, is like the embodiment of what an aggro control deck wants to do. because it's a creature you can play early, and then you can sit back and control the game while your win condition just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So it's a 3-mana 1/1 with trample, and whenever a player casts a spell, it gets bigger. It's a +1/+1 counter. Displacement waves here too. You're going to have bigger creatures just like the blue-white deck, so you can make it, even though it's a symmetrical effect, you can hurt your opponent more with it. And Outland Colossus and Woodland Bellower are other big finishers that would, of course, also love Stratuswalk. Stratuswalk and Outland Colossus is just disgusting. So I think this archetype will be good. I think it's very similar to the blue-white archetype, but I think the blue-white archetype is probably a little better because evasion is better, and there's just more evasion in blue-white than there is here. But yeah, so those are the archetypes. As you can see, I'm higher on some that are really well supported. I think that Elves, if I had to think about what the best ones were, I think that the black-green Elves deck and the blue-red Artifact deck and the blue-white Flyers deck are probably going to be the three archetypes that are supported the most, and that will on average come together the most often because there are so many commons and uncommons you can get for it to make it work. And then the rest are all just sort of in the middle for me. And then the black-red archetype is basically non-existent, and if you're in those colors, you'll almost never actually make the deck around the archetype, unfortunately. So, sorry for the rather long video. I hope that the timestamps at the bottom help you if you didn't want to watch this whole thing. That's why I included the timestamps. Let me know what you think about the archetypes, whether or not you think they're important at all in the format, or whether you think I'm a little down or high on archetypes that shouldn't be. So anyway, thanks.